Real stories of werewolves, of dogmen from history, from your emails, illustrated and animated with the democratizing magic of machine learning AI. Welcome to Scary Stories.
I saw a dogman run 50 miles an hour. Dear Scary Stories NYC. I grew up in Wisconsin and have spent most of my adult life in Michigan. I've heard plenty of stories about the dogman and the Wisconsin werewolf. Heck, I've even been listening to eyewitness accounts of run-ins with the dogman since I was too short to ride the roller coasters at the amusement parks. The thing is, I never really did believe any of those stories that people told me. I felt like they were seeing a bear with mange, you know? In my opinion, in those days, if the dogman was real, we'd have its DNA. We'd have its bones. We'd have a couple of them at the zoo. When a bear gets sick, it thins out. And when it gets thin enough, it really starts to look like a giant dog. To me, that was all that was needed to explain the dogman away. Until, that is, I had my own dogman experience. So I think of this as something that happened recently, but honestly, I guess it was 2 or 3 girlfriends ago when I got chased by the big old gray man. It's years ago already, even if it feels like only yesterday. So I forget why, but I was driving from Manistee to the northeast on US Highway 2 one late night. This is just to the south of the Hiawatha National Forest. I was up over by the Gray Wolf Lodge, which is actually the name of a reasonably priced 3-star motor hotel. With a name like that, it sounds like that's the place where the High Order of Werewolves have their secret meetings and plan out the world for the next year. But actually, I believe it's under $100 a night to stay there, and you have access to a patch of the beach, too. You just have to cross over US Highway 2 and follow the path downward, and then you'll get to the patch of beach that belongs to the Gray Wolf. I've only heard good things about the place from visitors traveling through the area. Now, what made that night different from any other night was that on that night, when I drove past the Gray Wolf Lodge on my right, and the sign on my left pointing out the path to the beach, available to those staying at the motel, there was a really big bear with mange standing upright on his hind legs on that pathway, as though he had been walking up from the beach. In fact, I saw him take a step, and I could tell in an instant that this was not actually a bear, with mange or without. This creature's legs were too long in proportion to the body, for one thing. Its front legs were totally wrong for any kind of animal at all. They were sort of closest to a monkey's arms, but they weren't really like those either. It stood and walked sort of like a really crazy human. It didn't move like a chimp or bear or kangaroo or ostrich or anything else I can think of that walks on its hind legs even some of the time. This seemed to be a man in an absolutely remarkable gray dogman or werewolf costume. My mind leaped to the certainty that I had to be looking at not an animal, not a cryptid, not a bear with mange, but a man in a beautifully made werewolf costume, worthy of being in a big-budget horror film. And yet there that costume was, on display in the dark on a highway out in front of the Gray Wolf Lodge. I didn't think a local motel could afford much in the way of advertising, so that meant this costume had to be affordable. I had my own business at the time, which would sometimes pull wacky publicity stunts. When I saw that Gray Wolf man walking toward the highway, I screeched the car to a halt and called out the window to the guy. He stopped and stared at me, and I waved him over, asking him how much the costume cost to make, and how much he was getting paid. When the guy didn't answer any of my questions, I figured he was staying in character as this monster that he was playing for this promotion. Whatever he's getting paid, I thought to myself, he's worth at least double that. I got annoyed that he wasn't answering me, so I called out to him even more loudly. He didn't like that. Suddenly, the lips on that big dog mask pulled back, revealing 2 rows of the longest, scariest, and also most realistic-looking dogman teeth I am ever going to get to see. If that were a real animal, I'd have been quivering with fear. But I knew the dogman wasn't a real thing, so I knew this had to be some young guy in a costume. A tall young guy, but a young guy. As a businessman, it was my job to determine if he had created the suit, or if he was merely the actor. And I needed to get some sort of contact information. A phone number, a website, an internet handle, a name. When he bared his teeth, I applauded, clapping loudly. If I didn't know it was a fake, I'd have been terrified. I mean, I was already scared in that way you get when you have to talk to a clown at a supermarket opening or whatever. Actually, I find clowns even scarier than Dogman, but that's my thing. This costume of a man-eating Dogman was truly almost as scary as a clown, and I had some goosebumps, even while I felt certain that I was in no real danger. Then, the large fanged costume began running on its hind legs toward me, growling so loudly that it almost sounded like an approaching motorcycle. That wasn't some dude in a costume, and it wasn't some sick old bear either. I didn't know what it was, but I knew that I threw that car into gear and hit the gas rather than wonder about whatever that was any further. This is why I've studied Eastern philosophies and approaches in the years since this incident. I decided what I was seeing before I knew what I was seeing. Rather than acting on facts, I was acting on illusions I was projecting outward. I was trying to impose my own ideas on the world, instead of just trying to comprehend what was happening. So you can tell how scary the sight of a real dogman running at my face in the middle of the night was. It shocked a big dummy like me into getting philosophical about life. Well, the dogman, and by this point there could be no doubt that this is what it was, ran after me, keeping pace with my car as we accelerated. It was running upright, with the grace of a cheetah running down on all fours. It might have been close to 7 feet tall, and appeared gangly when walking, but when it needed to move more quickly, every muscle and bone knew exactly where it needed to go. The creature ran more swiftly than it should have been able to, and I found that as I increased my velocity, so did the monster canine. Soon it was not only running too fast for a bear with mange, but it was running faster than the fastest Olympic sprinter. The dogman was not a bear, and was not a man in a costume. So what was it? It was a dogman. That's what it was. And there's nothing else in the entire Midwest like the dogman. I got myself up around the speed limit, which I think is 45 over there, and at first I thought I had outrun the beast. I didn't see its head any longer in my mirrors. But then, I saw something that almost made me get sick right there in the car while driving. Along my left, in the rear, I saw the glowing eyes of that dogman, now about level with my own, pulling around as if to try to pass me. Rather than tiring out and giving up, the dogman had dropped down to all fours and was only gaining speed. I leaned harder onto the gas, going on up past the speed limit to 55 or maybe higher, and I succeeded in putting a few feet between me and that beastman, but nothing more than that. How fast was that thing able to run? I was feeling dizzy, because there shouldn't be any kind of animal that I shouldn't have been able to outrun by that time, I don't think. We whizzed down the road, but we were the only two. I looked around desperately for someone else. Anyone else. I needed someone else to at least see what was happening. I mean, initially I was hoping some other people or vehicles might distract the dogman, or even scare it off. But after a while, my hopes had dissipated to the point where I just wanted people to know afterward that it was the Dogman who did me in. I did not lose my mind. I did not have road rage. I did not do myself in. No, it was the Dogman, and I wanted the world to know. I mean, mainly I wanted to get away from the thing, but if it was gonna win this duel, then I didn't want to die in vain. I wanted to go down in history. I wanted to be the one to prove that Dogman was real. This way I'd at least be remembered as someone who contributed something to human society. You can tell I felt the Dogman had the upper hand. I was already thinking of my legacy while it was still chasing me down that road. I'll be honest, it was emotional behind that steering wheel on that night. I was making all sorts of promises to God, and I think I might have even sent out some mental feelers to the devil, too. The way that Dogman looked, I guess I might have felt Satan would have more sway with him than the Almighty. So yeah, I was going through all the stages of grief while being chased by this seemingly super powerful animal man. And then I noticed some people in the parking lot of the bowling alley, and on an impulse, I made a sharp turn and drove into the lot toward them. They seemed to be packing things into 3 cars, and I guess they might be the owners of or workers at that bowling alley. It was my deepest hope that the Dogman would not want to approach a crowd of 5 or 6 humans, but as I drew closer I noticed that at least 2 of them were petite women, and I wondered if I were leading that Dogman up to a buffet banquet of human meat. What if he decided to take this bunch of tired folk on and take them down? I would be as guilty as he was for what happened. In fact, I would be more guilty, because I'm not supposed to be a dumb animal. I'm supposed to be an adult human being. I saw the alarmed looks on the people I was driving quickly toward, and I saw that it was me they were frightened of, not any sort of animal-headed ape man. I slowed down and steered a bit away from those folks so that I would look a little less like an insane car bomber, and I began looking around behind me for the Dogman. When I couldn't see him anywhere, I got out and looked around in 360 degrees. Nothing. One of the people called out to me and asked if I was okay. I explained to them that I had been getting chased by a 7-foot-tall werewolf who could run 50 miles an hour when down on all fours, and one of the ladies interrupted me to call me a crackhead. Then, she told me to get out of there quick before she called the police. As I was driving off, I thought of all sorts of good comeback lines that would have been so funny if I had said them back there. I consoled myself with the notion that I was driving away safely, while that nasty-mouthed lady was standing in a parking lot right back where I last saw that hungry Dogman. I suppose I wish I had a better ending to the tale than that creepy girl calling me a crackhead, but still, I think it's a pretty good anecdote to tell. I mean, how many other people can honestly say to you, I saw a Dogman run 50 miles an hour. Dogman scared me into the lake. Before we begin, the person who submitted the email we are basing this episode on wanted to make sure I left in their sentiments about anonymous stories. They feel cowardly and apologetic for not including their real name with this narrative. I want it clear that I don't personally think that's cowardly at all, and we love getting anonymous stories from you guys out there. Obviously, it's always better when we get names and places, but we understand that not everyone is in a position to do that. We here at Scary Stories have no judgments at all, and are grateful for every cryptid story people send in, especially Dogman stories. The opinions expressed in this episode are those of the alleged witness and not of the creators of this channel. Now let's get started. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I always planned to tell this story once I was retired, but with inflation the way it is, retirement is just never gonna happen. My 70th birthday passed in December, and I'm still a hamster running on a wheel to keep the electricity turned on. I want to tell my Dogman story while I'm still alive. Let's face it, I might still be here in a quarter century, or I might be gone in 10 minutes. Every day I get to wake up at my age is a gift, an extra bonus prize. I really want to attach my name to this account I'm about to tell, but, and I am ashamed to admit this, I'm too afraid of being ostracized from some of the people I do business with in order to put food on my table. I don't blame you if you think less of me for this. I know I am not proud to admit it. So, I'll tell you the story in the way a coward tells his story, anonymously. If you grew up around the Great Lakes, you'd already know that those lakes are really seas. By comparison, there are a lot of lake-sized lakes in the region, including the one this story took place at, which is called Hamlin Lake. If you can find it on a map, it looks like a tiny little swimming pool or wading pond on a little bump of land on the Michigan side of Lake Michigan. This was where I went camping with some of my college buddies the year after we graduated, which was 1972, I believe, or possibly 73. In those days, I knew about Bigfoot because I had seen documentaries of some sort. Maybe I'd seen the Boggy Creek movie too, I'm not sure, but I knew the word Bigfoot, and I felt at the time it might be real. I also used to sort of believe in UFOs and Loch Ness and whatever else, just because it was kind of the spirit of the time to accept new and different ideas. I think most of the people I knew who were my own age basically believed in UFOs and cryptids until at least the later 70s or early 80s, when so many people got into Reagan and became yuppies and conservatives. In spite of all this, I not only didn't believe in the Michigan Dogman, I had never heard of its legend, or even any rumors or cautionary bedtime stories. My parents never heard of him or the Wisconsin Werewolf either. We had no stories of the Wolfman that we ever heard from friends, and we had no rumors of oversized canines either. I've read and heard that the legends go way back in the Midwest of unique and aggressive mystery canines, often but not always walking upright and appearing somewhat humanoid. But I've only read about that in the 21st century, to be completely honest. I'm not questioning this assertion that the werewolves were always here. I'm only saying that the legends evaded me, my family, and my friends until much more recently. I believe that people have been seeing these creatures for a very long time in the Midwest, but maybe most of them kept the stories to themselves or within their own small circle. The legend, at least for me, didn't seem as pervasive as those of the Bigfoot monsters in Washington, Arkansas, or even Ohio. Although I had never heard of Sasquatch being in Michigan either, I would more have expected to see him than what it was that I did see. On this particular day, I was in a hippie adventurer mood when I got up that morning. I wandered until I found a short pier with no boat moored to it. The pier was probably private property, but it was the early 70s, man. So I walked out and stood at the end of the wooden construction, water surrounding me below, and I felt a kind of relaxation and peace I hadn't expected to be swept up into. I sat down at the edge of the very short pier and let my legs dangle over that edge. Sometimes the waves would come up just high enough to wet and tickle the soles of my bare feet, and other times they would just miss. It was a very memorable kind of peaceful bliss being alone there in that moment. It was like one long, endless sigh. I dream of that moment still to this day. I'm always so grateful to be back there. And then, in my dreams, I hear the sound of something large coming up behind me, and I start to remember what happened next. That's when the dream becomes a nightmare. When I first turned around on that day and saw the dog that walked like a man, I was extremely surprised, even stunned by what I saw. Now, when the dream comes back, I know there's a monster behind me even as I turn my head to look. I get a bad feeling in my stomach, like when you're watching a movie you've seen before and you suddenly remember you've arrived at the scariest part in the entire picture. You want to close your eyes or go get something from the kitchen, but this isn't a movie. This is a dream about something bad, and you're going to have to live through it all over again. I always wake up and sit there wondering what else I should have done. I wonder why I let this happen to me. I blame myself, and I want to understand what I did wrong to allow this to occur in the first place. Now, there was nobody else out there but me, and there was nothing else there but water and sand and that pier for the most part. I mean, off in the distance were trees and I think some private homes, but there was no living soul within distance as I sat down there in the beginning. When I turned around this time, though, there was a huge, dog-headed ape man standing right there. No, I think it would be more accurate to say it was walking toward me, sort of shambling toward me like a homeless person or a member of the zombie horde. I can't remember if this was happening at sunrise or sunset, but I'm guessing it was the latter. The light was fading, or at least faded, and aside from the outline of its form, the only feature I could make out were these two bright, glowing eyes. I used to say they glowed red when I told the story, and that's true, but it was orangey. It was between amber and red. That might be a better way to describe it. Recently, as I've begun sharing this old story with trusted friends, they ask me if it had hands or thumbs, as in many modern Dogman sighting reports. It was dark enough that I literally can't speak to that. I remember it holding its arms in front, so they may have been dog legs and not arms. This might have been an upright walking canine in a very strict sense. Now, while I talked about it shambling like the living dead, it did not skip along as an ordinary pet dog will do if it learns to walk upright. It didn't have that tiptoeing look. It didn't, prance along. It shambled and limped, but it did so in a very humanoid way. If I could compare its way of walking to anything, it would be the mummy in those old black and white horror films. I realize I'm dating myself, but if you find a scene from an old black and white mummy movie, look how the monster walks. This werewolf's bipedal movements reminded me more of the mummy than anything else. Well, needless to say, I felt trapped. I jumped into the water and swam to the other side. I really didn't even know how to swim, but I figured it out in what I'm sure was an ugly display of flailing arms and legs. I somehow got to the beach on the opposite side, gasping for air and barely still conscious. Looking around, I could no longer see that dog man anywhere. I was completely shaken up, and if I had the energy, I might have cried. I didn't have the energy, though, so I just lay there on the sand, my clothes drenched and heavy, my chest heaving as much air into my lungs as it could expand to take in. I told myself the dogman or werewolf or whatever it had been was gone. I told myself I was safe and that the danger was over. And then I heard it. I heard the howl of the dogman, and I was running. I never decided to get up and run away. I just made note of the fact that I had already done so. Someone or something else had made the decision, and off to the races I went. Amazing how I could be too exhausted to open my eyes 1 second and running at top speed the next. But if you heard the howl of the dogman, and if it sounded as close to you as that howl sounded to me, then I bet you'd be off running back to your friends also. So I had an authentic Michigan Dogman experience years before I even heard of the Michigan Dogman. My life was forever sent in a different direction since the unforgettable moment when Dogman scared me into the lake.
If you want a coloring book full of monstrous delight, then give this a look. It'll give you a fright. right, right. Scary stories, coloring book, werewolf coloring book. And just to make your mind explode, it's a digital download. All it costs is $2.09, and then you will be feeling fine. Coloring monsters today, hey, it's a coloring book, hooray. Okay, link is in the description.
Thanks, Biggie. And thanks to all of you for watching this far. If you liked it, please click like. If you'd like to see more of our work, please subscribe. And also click that bell icon if you'd like to be notified when we put out a new episode. To become an executive producer, you can donate to us through the thanks button under each of our videos or through our paypal.me/PeterBernard209 page. To receive cool perks like secret uncensored Dogman episodes far too wild to ever run on this channel, you can become a YouTube channel member by clicking the join button, or join our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com. Joining either at the $3 a month level or above gets you access to our over 25 hours of secret uncensored Dogman stories available nowhere else. Do you have a scary story about Dogman or some other kind of high strangeness that happened to you? Let us know by emailing us at scarystoriesnyc@gmail.com or by leaving us a voicemail message at 804-LA-SCARY. You may need to call back on that when it cuts off after I think 3 minutes. And if you don't want to do any of that stuff, thank you for simply watching to the end. Good night, and have a scary tomorrow.
Come back for more scary stories.